Okay guys, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to create the crank arm. This right here is what the crank arm should look like. If we look at it from the front, we can see that we have an arm that comes out towards the front but at an angle, and if we look at the top, we can also see that all three of these are on different planes. This first arm looks to be in line with the origin. The second arm is at an angle, and the third arm is at a different angle. So let's go ahead and create this part using a new standard IPT. To create this part, we are first going to be drawing on the XZ plane. When we get to the XZ plane, all we're going to be putting is a circle that will represent the middle hub, and the diameter will be 1.38. Once you have that, finish your sketch and extrude it symmetrically 1.63. Now once you have this will represent our center hub. We're first going to create this first arm that goes off in the right direction. So we need to create some planes and some offset planes. So go over to your browser bar and click on the plus sign next to origin. I want you guys to highlight the YZ plane. This is the plane that we are going to start on, and from here I want to make a sketch, and we're going to make a rectangle like so. As you see, the rectangle is inside this center hub. So if you right click and go to Slice Graphics, it will cut it open so you can see what you're doing. We are then going to place our rectangle directly in the center by using our horizontal or our vertical constraint. So I'm going to click on my origin and then find the center and then find the midpoint of my rectangle. This locks it right into the middle. Before we add any dimensions, I do want to add a point to this right line of my rectangle. This marks the midpoint of my vertical line here. I'm now going to dimension from the top of the hub to that midpoint, and this is going to be 0.64. I'm now going to add the rest of my dimensions. The vertical thickness or distance is 0.38, and the width from left to right is 1.38. This is now correctly placed, and we can finish our sketch. We now need to put something over here to represent the other hub. Now, I know what you're thinking, and you guys are thinking, well, why don't we just draw from the top and draw this line, or draw this shape? Well, that would make sense if the shape had the same thickness. Over here, the thickness of this is 0.25, and at the hub, the central hub, the thickness is 0.38. So we can't necessarily do that. So that's why we can't just draw it regularly. So in order to do that, we're going to go over here to plane, click on the pull down menu, and go to offset from plane. We're going to create an offset plane from the YZ at a distance of 3.5. Okay? Once you have that, we can go ahead and create our sketch. What I want to do is I want to project the geometry, or just this point. Okay? That point will help us determine where the center of this point will help us determine where to locate our rectangle. So I'm just going to draw a random rectangle like so, and then constrain it using my different constraints or my vertical constraint to lock in, to make sure that this is directly in line with the origin, And now I'm going to click on my other constraint, my horizontal or vertical constraint, and make sure that it's locked in with that midpoint. Now I can go ahead and add my different dimensions. The width of this from left to right is 0.88 and the thickness is 0.25. Once you have that, finish your sketch. Now, what we normally would do is extrude it, but extruding just puts it in a straight line. So what we're going to do is we're going to loft these two parts together, or these two sketches together. So what you see here in this dialog box, it asks you for which sections you want to add. So we're going to click right here where it says click to add and hover over where we drew our first sketch, or our sketch 2. Once you click that, go back up here, click to add, and add the second sketch that we created. As you guys can see, the preview shows that it goes from a large rectangle and it tapers down into a smaller rectangle. Go ahead and say OK, and here's what we have. Let's go ahead and turn off the visibility of this plane since we're done with it. So go to right click on the plane and go to visibility. Alright, now what we need to do is we need to create another offset plane to represent this other arm, this arm number 2. So we're going to go down to the pull down menu of plane and go to angle to plane around edge. Click on that, and you have to read down here in the status bar what Inventor wants you to do. It says to select a line or plane. We are going to angle off of the YZ plane, so we're going to click there, and we're going to use the y-axis as our rotation. So once you have that, or once you click on that, type in 165 degrees. This is the angle that we want. So we have our plane that is at an angle to our first arm. Now we need to create an offset plane. So I'm going to click on the plane that I just made and create an offset that is 3.63 inches away. So now I have two separate planes that I can draw, or that I can use. So let's go ahead and create our different sketches. I'm going to go ahead and create a sketch on work plane 2. Right click and click on Slice Graphics. I want you guys to go ahead and create a rectangle and just over exaggerate the size. Click on point and add it to that midpoint right here of this vertical line. This will make sure that our vertical location is correct. So from the top of our part to that point that we made, this is going to be 0.32. Okay, now we just have to put in our dimensions. This is going to be 0.38, and our width from left to right is 1.38. Oh, and we do have to make sure that we are exactly in the middle, so go to your horizontal vertical constraint and make sure that you are locking in your origin and your midpoint. Okay, so once you have that, go ahead and say OK, and now we're going to create a second plane or a second sketch over here. I'm going to rotate it so I'm looking at the left or the back isometric like so. and create a sketch here. The reason why I did that is so that way I can see what I'm doing rather than having to slice graphics. I'm just looking at it from the opposite angle. Go to Project Geometry and make sure that you highlight that midpoint that we drew, or that point. Draw in your random rectangle and then lock in your midpoints to the origin and to that point that we had from our first sketch. Okay, now go ahead and add our dimensions, 0.25 or 0.25 tall, and our width is going to be 0.88. All right, so once you have that, let's go ahead and loft these two things together. Click to add. I want to hover in here, see if I can't find the sketch that we drew, and then click to add and click on that outside sketch and say OK. Alright, so now that we have those two arms drawn, like so, I'm just going to go ahead and right click on each of the planes and turn off the visibility. Now here comes the harder part, and that's adding this third arm, this third crank arm. If we look at it isometrically, we see that it has two curves, a curve going down and one that levels back out. Okay, so we're going to be following the same process that we just did, drawing our first sketch for the center hub, our second sketch for the outside hub, and then adding the different dimensions as we need. Okay, so let's go ahead and create angle to plane around edge. So we're going to angle the YZ plane around the Y axis, and this is going to go at an angle of 150. Okay, and that's fine. That's what we need. And now we're going to repeat that process, angle to plane around edge. We're going to choose that work plane that we just made, and we're going to rotate it around the Y axis. And we're going to make those two planes perpendicular, so that just means put it at 90. And then we're going to offset this plane here 3.25 inches away. So I know that it looks like a lot, and it kind of is. We have 1, 2, 3 planes. All right, so let's go ahead and start the process that we have been doing so far. So I'm going to be working on the central hub. Okay, if for whatever reason you rotate it and you can't get back to the original view from when you originally rotated, or from when it originally created a sketch, you can go ahead and click on this page, or this button right here that says look at, and it'll rotate it to whatever you click on. Okay, so let's slice our graphics so that we can see the inside. We're going to create our random rectangle. We're going to put our point, and now we're just going to add our dimensions. So from the bottom edge to here, this is going to be 0.32. Our thickness is 0.38, and our width is 1.38. Now all we need to do is just align our rectangle with the origin, and that completes this sketch. So finish your sketch, and now we're going to create a sketch on our plane out this way to create our outside hub. So here the hub, or I'm sorry, the rectangle is going to be floating below what we've drawn so far. So before we get too far, I want you guys to project the geometry of that point that we created, so that way we can use it for reference. And then create a second point out on, create a second point right here on our midpoint of our rectangle. So from this point to this point, this is 1 inch. And now we can just go ahead and add our different dimensions. This is 0.25, and the thickness or the width from left to right is 0.75. Now we just have to line it up with the origin and say OK. Finish sketch. Alright, now what we have done so far in creating lofts is create straight lines. And creating lofts with straight lines is relatively simple, but for this third arm, we see that we have a swoop. Okay, so we have to draw that before we can move, or before we can loft anything. So on this plane that we created right here, we're going to go ahead and create a sketch. And on this sketch, we're just going to create the swoop. So create a sketch and rotate it just a little bit, so that way we can project geometry. So we're going to project the geometry of this point here and this point here. Okay, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but that's fine. So I'm going to highlight my work plane and then click on look at, so that way it's flat. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a straight line like so, a straight line like so, and then one that connects to the midpoint that we had. Okay, I just want to make sure that this line is going to be flat. Okay, there it is, it's flat. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this swoop, but I don't want the swoop to start from, let me rotate it so that way we're looking at it like so. I don't want the swoop to start from in here, because then it won't give us the right curve. I want it to start from out here. So I need to know the midpoint, or the distance from the center of our hub to the edge of our hub, and that is where the swoop will start. And the same thing up here. We can't have our swoop start over here. It has to start on the outside of our hub. So we're just going to add some dimensions. Our outside hub is has a diameter of 0.75. So that means that half of that is 0.375. Okay, half of 1.38 is, I don't know. So we're just going to type in 1.38 divided by 2. And we have this drawn in. Okay. Just real quick checking my work, making sure that we're all okay. Okay. I think we're okay. Oop. Look at no. Okay. So now we're just going to create some arcs. So from this point here to the midpoint, we're going to create an arc like so. From the midpoint to this point, we're going to create an arc like this. So an arc that swoops up and an arc that swoops down. I'm going to use my tangent constraint to make sure that these are tangent and that this is tangent, because I don't want my swoop to do something weird. Okay, so now that we have those two swoops That's all I need. So I'm going to click on this line and get rid of it. That's just a reference line, so we don't need it. Okay. Now that we have that, we can go ahead and finish our sketch. All right. So now let's loft our features. Okay. So we're going to loft our sketch out here of the outside hub to our sketch in here of the inside hub. And as you can see, it wants to go in a straight line. Well, we don't want it to go in a straight line. We want it to use this curve that we created, and that's called a rail. So we're going to click on rail and then select on our swoop. Well, nothing happens, and that's just because of the option that is chosen right here. We don't want a rail, we want a center line, which is what the curve or the swoop that we made. So now that we have this swoop, we can go ahead and say okay, and there's our third arm. So we have 1, 2, and 3. So I can go ahead and turn off the visibility for all 3 of these planes. We don't need them anymore. And what I'm going to add is we have our central hub, and now we need to add our outside hubs. There are many ways to create the outside hubs. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. I'm just going to show you one of the many ways. So create a sketch on this outside face of our first arm, and all I'm going to do is create a rectangle. I'm going to use my constraints to lock in my midpoint to the midpoint of my hub, and then I'm going to click on this line and lock it in to the midpoint of the arm. Now go ahead and add the dimensions. This should be 0.64, and as it turns all black, that's all we need. And go ahead and finish your sketch. I'm just going to do all 3 of these at the same time. So I'm going to make a sketch over here. Now this one's a little bit different, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to make a point on the midpoint here, and then create my arm. I'm sorry. I'm going to create a midpoint there and then create my rectangle on top. And I'm not connecting it using my constraints, I'm going to be dimensioning it. So this midpoint, or from the top to the midpoint, this is going to be 0.32. And from the bottom of my rectangle to the midpoint, this is going to be 0.44. So that's why I didn't lock anything into place. Go ahead and click on our collinear constraint and lock in this line with this line, and then our coincident constraint, this line to this point, and finish your sketch. Now let's go ahead and add our last hub, which is out here on this arm, and it's just going to repeat the same process as the first one, like that. And I'm just going to add my different constraints and just make sure that everything is in the right location. And again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. Alright, so now that I have these 3 rectangles drawn, I'm going to use my revolve feature. Okay, so go ahead and click on revolve, and I'm just going to highlight this entire rectangle. Once you have that highlighted, we're going to click on select axis, and we're choosing the central line, or this inside line of the rectangle that we created, and it creates our revolution. Now repeat that same process with each of the other rectangles. And this one out here as well. Revolve. Make sure that you select the entire rectangle and the axis. All right. Okay, so we're almost done. What we have so far is our arms, our central hub, and our outside hubs. Now we have to create the 4 holes. So all we're going to do is go to hole up here at the top. We're going to select this surface, so just click right here, and then click on the circle so that it highlights, and that makes sure that the centers of both of our circles are in the same spot, or that they are concentric. This circle, or this diameter here is 0.505. This one right here in the center, let's repeat that same process. This has a diameter of 0.878. This one here has a diameter of 0.44. Oop. Okay. And this one out here has a diameter of 0.313. All right, we're almost done with this. We have all 4 of our holes drilled, if you want to say. Now we just need to add fillets. So adding fillets is relatively easy. It's just a lot of pointing and clicking. So all 4 corners of each hub are rounded, or that they have fillets. And you guys can see I'm doing this pretty quick. I'm not really rotating my views because everything is highlighted through the different parts. Okay. So the problem I have with the size of this these fillets is that these are just way too big. So I'm going to decrease the size from 0.125 down to 0.06. So I'm essentially halving the size of our fillets. So once you have that, just go ahead and say OK. And now, if you look at it, we have everything drawn pretty well. Okay. So what we have here matches the original part. So let's go ahead and save this as the crank arm. All right. In the next video, I will show you how to lay this out on a sheet and how to add section views. If you guys have any questions, please let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next video.